Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a champion of sustainability and climate change from London in the UK, Heather Buchanan. Heather, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Heather is the co-founder and chief executive officer of Bankers for Net Zero, which is B4NZ. She has been recognized as one of the 20 trailblazing women in climate change and shortlisted as a Sustainability Leader of the Year and Women in Green Business. So, Heather, my first question for you, what initially sparked your interest in sustainability and climate change?
Well, I think sustainability and climate change have always been something that I've been interested in. And it's all around us now, isn't it? And I think, particularly with B4NZ and whatnot, what I've really become interested in, and this is where I really focused over the last years, is kind of how are we going to transition when we're moving through, such a major cultural kind of shift and adaptation. So I think it's something that we've always been aware of. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and we had the ozone layer, and we had bits and bobs, but these last years things have really accelerated, and so I just wanted to think about what I could do, in my little kind of niche of the world to kind of help that get aligned.
Thank you. And how do you see the role of the financial sector in combating climate change, and why the financial sector? Do you have a background in the sector?
So I don't have a background in the finance sector per se. So I've never worked in a bank or a financial institution. I've got oddly enough, I always joke that I'm still in my gap year, because I went and traveled for most of the 90s in Africa and the Middle East, and kind of went and saw the world. And then when I came back to London, actually to Scotland, and now London, was working mostly in policy and in business. And listen, the financial, everything relies on finance. Our entire system revolves around the financial services sector. So, our ability to move or not move is really going to be dependent on how we can move money about the planet. And so my mission is to make that money move in the right direction.
Very well said. And as the old line says, money makes the world go round, isn't it?
Yes, indeed.
So let's talk about Bankers for Net Zero now, Heather. Tell me a little bit about Bankers for Net Zero, and what are the mission and objectives of this organization?
Certainly. So actually, Bankers for Net Zero was only supposed to last for a year. It was a one-off initiative that I'd started along with my co-founder, Louise Roper, in lead up to COP26. Obviously, the UK was hosting COP26, and we were thinking about what the things that we could do within that context to start talking very specifically around recognizing that in order for this transition to happen, the financial services sector was going to transform quite substantially. And banks, I mean, as you say, finance touches everything. Everybody's, pretty much everybody's got a bank account. Businesses all have to move their money about. And we recognize that how particularly businesses in the first instance were going to be able to transition was going to be very dependent. They were going to be very dependent on that relationship with the financial services sector. And ultimately, the language around financial services was going to be changing as we started measuring carbon, and we started, looking to transition plans, all of these things. And if we don't keep that touch point, we don't keep that kind of relationship, that understanding between the real economy and the financial economy, things can break down, and we can have very kind of severe adverse social consequences. So initially, this was just about getting a group around and saying, what are the challenges that we're going to be facing as we move forward? 1 year turned to 2 years, of course, because of COVID. And during that time, we were very involved with the UK team here that was setting up COP. We had a fantastic advisory board with our climate champion, Nigel Topping, and UNEP-FI and others. And at the time, one of the key focuses of the Race to Zero campaign, which that was started by the Climate Champions team, was about making sure that net zero commitments were credible. And actually, banks at that time didn't have a place to go. There wasn't a framework. And so UNFFI and the United Nations kind of set up the Net Zero Banking Alliance. And when that was set up, we kind of came on board as the first country chapter in the world. So we turned from our one-off initiative into a member body that meant that we look very specifically, whilst there's a great deal of work that goes on internationally on net zero commitments and the financial institutions' commitments to decarbonizing financed emissions, we look at that last sentence, decarbonizing financed emissions, because ultimately that means that every mortgage that a bank writes, every small business loan, every corporate loan, and the corporate's entire supply chain, financial institutions need to understand the journey that all of its customers are on. And that's not a small project. So we look very closely at where the biggest kind of difficult points are for institutions. What are the policy blockers? What are the policy enablers? We're very, very focused on the kind of big ticket policy pieces that can move the dial.
Wow. And can you share with me, for my viewers and listeners, an example of a successful collaboration that you've had within Bankers for Net Zero that has accelerated the transition to net zero?
Well, certainly. So I think one of the pieces of work that we're really leaning into has been around supporting SMEs and the SME supply chain in particular. So as all of our kind of commitments have been made by larger institutions, measuring Scope 3 emissions has been, it's been a conundrum for everybody. How do we kind of engage with the supply chain? How do we understand things? And up till now, one of the kind of primary focal points, it means that everything's been very top down. So, and larger institutions that are, where this reporting is mandatory, have been told to just be proportionate with their SMEs and with their supply chain. Right. So, of course, what this means is the SMEs who don't have the capacity, don't necessarily have the in-house expertise, in what's a very complicated and ever-evolving area, are getting multiple requests from multiple institutions through different lenses, and it's actually creating much bigger burden on them. So what we've done in the UK, and we're not there yet, we're still kind of working through it, but we've kind of put it into a framework. We've got a plan for this, is saying, well, let's take a step back and let's work on this from the bottom up. So there are going to be some common data points that we should make as easy as possible for people to get. So that we ask of the majority of SMEs that are actually 10 or fewer people, for the most part, micro businesses. Right. Let's make that as easy as possible for them, and let's make sure that the information that they get is something that they can act on. So rather than this becoming a burden, let's make it something that creates value for them as well. And so that's really where we are now. We're working alongside partners such as the OECD on they've got a platform for financing SMEs for sustainability, and working really closely with all the international standards bodies, making sure that we can kind of get that information, get a very cohesive set of questions to SMEs that's very consistent, so they have to do things once rather than a million times, and whether that's using credit rating agencies or direct questionnaires, whatnot. But for us, this is the opportunity to turn things from a burden into an opportunity. And one of the key elements of that is something we call the Perseus project, which is using the principles of open banking to actually automate assurable data flow within that. So rather than making it a burden, make it something where you can share your data at the touch of a button, and it brings back accurate data that's assurable, that you can track over time, and where you can start to interact with all the great kind of calculators out there to help on the decarbonization journey.
Well said. And in your journey so far, what would you say are some of the significant achievements of Bankers for Net Zero?
So I think one of the kind of bigger pieces is actually just getting all the. I always joke that my job is very kind of little more than connecting dots and herding cats. So trying to get all the stakeholders together in a room,
Yeah.
and particularly at the beginning, when we are able to act as a very neutral convener across a very wide spectrum of stakeholders. And so whilst we'd called ourselves Bankers for Net Zero, actually our members include all businesses, and we are moving towards kind of a more B4NZ terminology, but also civil society, NGOs, trade bodies, academia, the whole lot. And it's really important for us. And this is kind of one of our bigger theories of change, is that if we actually really want to move the dial and give politicians the confidence they need to really push ahead with things, rather than getting lobbied by all the different groups, let's actually come together with a cohesive ask, because people agree with a lot more than you'd actually think.
Well said. Well said. And how did your involvement in COP28 contribute to its global climate agenda?
So from our perspective, we were very focused on really highlighting the SME work that we were doing, because all of this focus has been on the big global corporates, who of course are major employers, but as we know, in most countries in the world, it's the SMEs that drive the economy. So we again very much featured with our Perseus project, and really kind of fly the flag for SMEs, and trying to get that cohesiveness, because also how we treat SMEs is, whilst it's going to be different in every country because of everybody's got different kind of legislative and cultural and regulatory environments, ultimately they do have, SMEs have a lot more in common than we give them credit for. And I think we were very focused on making sure that their voice is heard, and we continue to do that in all of our engagements.
Well said. You also, when I was preparing for my conversation with you, I was also very interested to learn from you that how do you work with the UN-convened Net Zero Banking Alliance?
Yeah, so the Net Zero Banking Alliance is where the global standards that sit within the Race to Zero campaign are. So we work very closely with them. We act as the convener for the UK country chapter. So not all of our members are members of NZBA, but they have to be kind of working towards those objectives. And that's a key element. So we meet with them quite regularly. NZBA obviously has an extraordinary number of work streams that they work on, and again we kind of sit and look, what sits under those work streams in terms of implementation on the ground. But we've got a fantastic partnership with them, and really, they do some great work in really moving this agenda forward.
Wonderful. Let me ask you a basic question, which I'm sure you've been asked many times. How do you define a green business, and what role does finance play in supporting them?
That's a very good question. And I think this is where we have to become. So there's clearly green businesses that have set up from scratch to, in a very kind of pure way to advance the green agenda, whether it's renewables or seaweed or whatever. But I think one of the tougher questions that we need to start talking about and be very cognizant of is, all the businesses in the hard to abate sectors, all the big businesses that have been in manufacturing for quite a long time, and now they're having to transition. And so I think this is an area that's evolving quite quickly. So we've got transition finance. In the UK here, we're doing the transition finance market review. We are looking at, what does a good transition plan look like? And I think that we have to be quite clear on getting that these are as much a part of the journey as as a pure renewable company, because we've got to go through this transition. So really getting to the point where there's a much kind of more public understanding of what transition plans look like, what a good transition plans look like, and then holding companies to account for those transition plans is critical, because then we can all kind of move together, and then finance can kind of flow through that. If we take things in too much of a binary sense, either, you know, good or bad, green or brown, we've got serious risks of not being able to transition in an effective way. And if anything, risking putting, you know, taking those businesses that could, with the support of a financial institution, transition, taking them out of the kind of mainstream finance world, in which case, you know, I would say we can take carbon off the balance sheet of an institution, but you can't take it off the balance sheet of the earth. So that kind of stewardship role is really, really important in terms of financial services as well.
And Heather, are you seeing any trends in green finance and investment?
So we certainly are. I would say that I think one of the bigger challenges that we still have right now is that fundamentally we're redefining what risk and value look like, and we're redefining it in a really, really rapid way. And so most of the instruments, so our financial system is set up to measure value based on the bottom line. You know, here, I'll give you my fun fact. 1494 was the first book on modern accounting.
Wow.
So we've just spent over the last, you know, over 500 years getting to a point where we assessed value based on a balance sheet and a P&L and a cash flow forecast. At no point was the value of nature, or was or, you know, what was climate change factored into that.
Correct.
And now we're having to factor that in a matter of years, and we don't know how to do it. We're learning it, and we're figuring it out as we go, but it's changing rapidly. And so again, this is an area where we have to understand that this transition that we're going through is absolutely imperfect. And I think the more honest we are about the imperfections and about the gaps in the data that we have is really kind of critical. But in all, you know, so the instruments that we use right now in terms of finance tend to try to, you know, that it's blended finance or insurance or guarantees that kind of help smooth over, I guess, the tensions that are in the system. So those are great now. I mean, obviously, the Inflation Reduction Act in the States is a perfect example. We're looking at in the UK at different blended finance models, but those those are still transition pieces. With a view that actually we need to get to the point where we're properly recognizing value and the value of nature within our financial services, you know, sector, and within our common understanding of what value is. But
well said. And how would you address the risks associated with greenwashing in the financial sector?
Data. I mean, it sounds kind of very basic and stuff, but I think back to my previous point, the actual data that we have around a lot of this stuff is they're estimates. It's imperfect. I mean, we're working on getting it better, but the system itself is still quite fragmented. So there's an increased push for transparency, which is great. But even then, you know, the way that the standards are set up right now, again, we don't have the tools that really allow us to dig behind that data yet. And so I get positive side, we're all working on that.
Yeah.
Negative side, it's going to take time. And so I'd like to say we're building the plane as we fly it, as it were. And so it naturally leads to either, you know, situations where things can be interpreted differently. You know, so you can have plenty of institutions absolutely working in good faith, but the data that sits under it is not there. And actually then you get to the green hushing point where almost institutions are afraid to talk about what they're doing because they know that there's gaps in the data there that they can't necessarily control. And then of course that also leaves those that don't have such good intentions within that. It leaves it open to maneuverability and interpretation. So that transparency of data and being understanding the supply chain and getting to the point where those are assurable is absolutely critical. And of course, the problem right now, of course, is that's a huge expense and it's a huge cost burden, rather than the opportunity that it could be in the future.
Well said. Time for two more questions for you. How do you balance short-term financial pressures with long-term sustainability goals?
I mean, that's the heart of the problem right now, isn't it? I always like to say that I think that until we stop, even on a news cycle, focusing on quarterly profits and fundamentally start bringing that value and placing value on firms that are going through transitions and whatnot, we're going to have that tension in the system. And this, again, is where things like blended finance, government-backed guarantees, in the insurance industry all will play a critical role in kind of de-risking that, so you still have that opportunity for finance to flow at an affordable rate, and with returns. But we also have to manage expectations that potentially the short-term returns will be lower, although that's not necessarily the case in all things anyway. But we just need to have that balance of understanding in there, and it's just not baked into our system. We still, every quarter somebody's profits coming out, and it's like, well, no, we should be putting as much value on where a firm is in their transition to net zero as in their returns. And that's quite a big shift, just in terms of kind of public consciousness.
Well said. And my last question for you, Heather, given the amount of work that you've been doing in this sector, and given the challenges Mother Earth is facing, what gives you hope for the future in the fight against climate change?
I cannot understate how significant, even since COP26, the change in direction and attitude that I've seen, just even on a corporate level, has been. It's been quite extraordinary. And when I speak with C-suite members of large multinationals and stuff, one of the things, and people always kind of, you say this, they say too, that in addition to the kind of regulatory changes and structures that are happening, said, oh yeah, that's all going on and we deal with that. They go home at night and their kids and their grandkids are giving them stick, saying, what are you doing to make sure that the world is better? And also they say their employees that come through, they said actually attracting good talent right now, it means that people, and particularly the younger generation, are expecting them and holding them to account in a way that they have, that dynamic has changed quite extraordinarily. So, listen, humans we are incredibly creative and destructive beings, as we know. And so I just hope, under pressure, we often find that the creativity is wins out. But I am also a pathological optimist. So
well said, and good luck. And on that note, Heather, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me about your own journey. Thank you for talking to me about Bankers for Net Zero, climate change. I think this is such a major challenge our world has been facing for many years. And I've often said, I'm from the boomers generation. My generation seems to have messed up the whole world, but generations down the line, and certainly the millennials, the Gen Z and the Gen Alpha are much, much more conscious than my generation was, and they probably will correct.
Yes, absolutely.
My generation made.
Yes.
Thank you for all that you're doing with Bankers for Net Zero. And thank you for a wonderful conversation. Good luck.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.